Guerrilla Games' Horizon Forbidden West prominently features the region of Big Sur, California. It is a beautiful recreation of the place, Bixby Bridge and all. And this is Big Sur, California. It's every bit as breathtaking as the game might lead you to believe, and then some, and just let me show you around. The views are just gorgeous. You can see the clouds kissing the mountains. In the nearby areas, you can see, also, homes high up with property values I don't dare to imagine. Having recently been up here, I desperately need to tell you about a story from just over this way that means everything for the game. For those unfamiliar, the Horizon games take place in a post-apocalyptic Earth, long after our time. Sea levels have risen such that prominent landmarks from our era now sit at the bottom of the oceans. Our world acts as ruins for Aloy to explore. In fact, a big part of how Horizon adapts California is by showing that the homes of famous Hollywood celebrities living at high elevations have somehow survived, while the rest of Los Angeles hasn't been so lucky. The homes of average people have sunk or been washed away. LA is a volcanic archipelago called the Burning Shores. San Francisco is called the Isle of Spires because it's primarily skyscrapers jutting out of the ocean. I'm standing in front of McQuay Falls at Julia Pfeiffer State Park in Big Sur. The waterfall there typically hits the sand, but at high tide, it can be considered a tidefall, or a fall that empties directly out into the ocean. This spot holds immense significance in Horizon Forbidden West, and that significance takes on layers of meaning if we look at its history. See, in 1924, former US Representative Lathrop Brown and his wife Helene traveled here and bought the land overlooking the waterfall, before building a house there in 1940 with a view of the beach. Fittingly, it was called Waterfall House. The Browns were art aficionados, and so they filled Waterfall House with, well, lots of art, including pieces by French painters like Paul Gauguin and Edgar Degas and Raoul Dufy. Lathrop died in 1959, and Helene decided to give the land to the state of California as the Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park, after her late friend Julia Pfeiffer, a pioneer from the area. Helene's wish was that Waterfall House be turned into an art museum. Unfortunately, lack of funding and accessibility for visitors to even get to the site made this not so feasible. Waterfall House was demolished into the ocean sometime later. Now, this is what remains. In the 31st century of Horizon Forbidden West, a new property sits overlooking McQuay Falls, one that belongs to an art collector. Her collection boasts several real pieces from the Rijksmuseum as part of a collaboration between Guerrilla and the actual museum in Amsterdam. This character is Tilda van der Meer, and she is a pioneer, art aficionado, and preservationist. Narrative director Ben McCaw was a longtime California native, and while there is no official word from Guerrilla about the intentionality of this parallel, or which of their writers thought to incorporate it here, it is still undoubtedly poetic that Helene Brown technically gets her wish here over a millennium later. This new Waterfall House is essentially a museum, one that's preserved our art better than almost any other place in the game. It's beautiful. When Horizon retells our old world, it typically fictionalizes details. When exploring the Las Vegas ruins, you learn the story of some entrepreneur named Stanley Chen. When exploring the Hollywood Hills, you find the home of some actress named Evelyn Day. In all cases, you learn something about the way our old world used to work through the diaries and logs of fictional characters, and you trace those stories to how they echo today. People still enterprise in new ways, and celebrity culture still lives on by a different name. At no point are Lathrop or Helene mentioned or referenced with regards to Tilda's mansion, yet Tilda's mansion is the one place that our real-life history and records are scanned and preserved so one-to-one. There is more to say about Tilda and her place in all this, and what this scene represents, but everything else from this point involves spoilers for Horizon Forbidden West, and a discussion of its themes. There's this strange moment at the climax of Forbidden West. It's the end of Act 2, and Aloy and her friends have just gotten out of a deadly confrontation with the villain faction, Far Zenith. Her sister is captured. A friend is fatally wounded. Before she's had a chance to process things, one of the Zeniths, the mysterious Tilda van der Meer, flies up to Aloy and envelopes her in a burst of light. We awake in a bunker, who knows where. By all accounts, the stakes have never been higher. This is an urgent moment for Aloy and for us. What the hell happened to our friends? Are they alive? Where did this Tilda lady even bring us? And how? We feel that urgency, but the game, inexplicably, pauses. It digresses. It suggests you take a few minutes. Aloy steps into the bunker and gets a call in her earpiece, or her focus in the game's parlance, from Tilda, inviting her to come join her for lunch so they can talk. But first, would you like to see her paintings? See, Guerrilla Games partnered with the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, where they're based, to bring these real-life historic works into the game, with the idea being that there would be this vault where they'd survived for 1,000 years. Through using these real paintings, they wanted to pay homage to Dutch culture, while simultaneously fleshing out Tilda, who herself is from Rotterdam. Here is the history of our world according to Horizon. 1,000 years before the post-apocalypse, we, the old ones, tried our best to stop the machine apocalypse from happening. We failed, but not without hope. Pioneer Elizabeth Sobek ensured that humanity would live on through Project Zero Dawn, a plan to repopulate the Earth using machine-grown embryos should our best efforts fail. The old ones spent their final days in underground bunkers, and that was the end for them. Aloy and her sister Beta are both clones of Elizabeth Sobek created centuries later, in response to a second existential threat coming for their world. In Forbidden West, we learn that a small group of wealthy, well-connected old ones survived the apocalypse by flying into space, where they discovered ways to extend their lifespans. These are Far Zenith. This is Tilda Vandermeer. And now they're back on Earth, for some reason. What we learn here, in this bunker, was that Tilda was an art collector whose preservation efforts have held up remarkably well, even in her absence. We're given a chance to admire all these pieces she brought in all those years ago. Aloy can interact with each piece multiple times, interpreting it herself in dialogue with how Tilda interprets it. It's essentially an extended session of ekphrasis, or writing in response to visual art, and genuinely fascinating character writing. And it makes sense. Of course, Guerrilla wants to get as much out of this momentous collaboration as they can. It's also just so weirdly placed. Almost every one of my instincts begged me to just skip the gallery and go directly out to see Tilda, to get some damned answers. Aloy is a naturally curious heroine, but also a hard-headed one with a strong sense of urgency, so it didn't feel particularly characteristic of her to linger in this moment either. But I did, and I'm glad because it is a truly atmospheric and contemplative moment, and this liminal weirdness cranks up the volume on what it's trying to say. In a literal sense, I like what Mekah has to say about this scene.
When Aloy enters Tilda's vault for the first time and sees all the art, she actually really doesn't know Tilda at all. So she's examining each object with the goal of trying to learn more about Tilda's personality and motivation. That's what makes the dialogue come to life. It's not just two people talking about some of the greatest treasures in Dutch history, it's two people trying to use those objects to learn more about each other and gain an advantage.
In a more symbolic sense, it becomes a moment of emotional rebirth in the game. Like Aloy's voice actor Ashley Birch points out, it's the first time her character has really ever had cause to walk through a space like this, or to think about art in this way, to be in touch with her feelings through metaphor and symbolism.
Having emotions reflected back in art that might feel maybe even safer to her.
It challenges her in a way no puzzle or combat set piece has. For the player, that challenge makes all the difference. It imbues this location with a new and unfamiliar meaning. It felt so removed from what I expect from the Horizon games that I wasn't sure for a while if I was supposed to see it as a literal place even. I recalled that Tilda used to simulate this house for herself in space, before Aloy met her. I activated my focus and heard machines I couldn't see.
Eventually, I developed scanning software that could detect fakes with unparalleled accuracy.
Was Aloy asleep? Was she hallucinating? Was this that simulation?
Tilda was waiting for me. In a virtual replica of a house on a cliff, overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful.
Guerrilla's narrative team worked closely with Rijksmuseum curatorial assistant Denise Campbell to select pieces for it that 1. Held special historical significance, and 2. Would say something about Tilda's character. In this way, Campbell deserves as much of the narrative credit for this moment as any of the game's writers do. Every piece adds a layer to Tilda's character that we then get to peel throughout the game's remaining hours, as we spend more time with her and learn her truth. This conversation over art isn't just conversation for conversation's sake, it's a negotiation. Already, some interesting things start to emerge. We see a recurring theme of impossible loves. We see Tilda's deep grief for those who aspire to save the world but know they can't. We see that she's brought in and preserved Rembrandt's The Night Watch. Both her and Aloy fixate on the girl in white, who seems to go unnoticed by all those around her.
Many believe she's a symbol of the militia. A physical manifestation of their spirit, if you will.
She's not real?
What's real in a painting? She's meant to represent the militia's virtue and victory. But I like to think they underestimate her. She looks as if she's seen something. What does she know? What secrets does she keep?
Tilda thinks the girl must know something. Of the many pieces in her collection, it is this pair, Johannes Vermeer's Woman Reading a Letter, and its Forgery, Woman Reading Music by Miheren, that links most directly to the game's themes though. Tilda says she likes to see them side by side, that the detail in the Forgery is more crisp, more clear, and yet almost too much so. You feel less, are her words.
But what makes one a masterpiece and the other simply an imitation?
The forgery looks sharper.
Good eye. The details are crisp. The contrast bold. It tells us more, and yet we feel less.
That's one interpretation, anyway. See, this is just Tilda's take. Do I feel less when I walk through here in a video game, with its crisp Ultra HD graphics and curated art direction, compared to when I walk through all this? Surely I feel more actually being here. The real Big Sur is, well, it's big, and it's scenic and beautiful, but it's also cloudy. Much of it isn't reachable or navigable by foot. The beach by McQuay Falls is close to visitors for safety reasons, so we can't visit it in real life or ever see the waterfall up close. Aloy can, though. Everything feels in clearer focus and more ripe for play in the game, but that's only because so much of the region's wilds, its unpredictability, its biodiversity, can't be translated to Horizon's world. We're not meant to know all of it, and that's okay. When we drove up, the path to the house's old foundation was also closed, so this was as close as I could get. But there is apparently an additional trail marker there, showing photos that look strikingly similar to what we see in Tilda's mansion. See, when I put these spaces, real and virtual, side by side, I'm not so concerned with quantifying how much I feel. Instead, I notice where the two spaces speak to each other. Knowing Helen Hooper Brown's story helped me appreciate Tilda's mansion tenfold, and knowing what Guerrilla Games did with this place in this 2022 PS5 video game helped me reflect on Helen's legacy more. I notice where they don't speak to each other too. When Tilda looks at Vermeer and Miheren's works, she sees only a masterpiece and an imitation. She doesn't credit the forgery to Miheren, despite him being one of the most well-known forgers of all time, but the Rijksmuseum and the game do. It is a clear omission on her part. Perhaps she's paying tribute. He was an infamous forger, so to name him would be to undermine how good the deception was. Or perhaps, bear with me here, she doesn't actually care about the forgery. Despite these paintings being pseudo-copies, we know they have two different stories, two different provenances. That's not what matters to Tilda. Story and context don't matter so much as the objects themselves. See, Tilda as a character actually provides a unique insight on everything these games are about. We learned that back in the day, she found great success by creating the most advanced forgery detection software of our time.
My favorite pairing. On the left is Woman Reading a Letter by Vermeer, a true master. on the right is a forgery. Woman reading music, which fooled experts into believing it was a priceless original. Early in my career, I became fascinated with such deceptions. Eventually, I developed scanning software that could detect fakes with unparalleled accuracy.
She balks at imitative works, but is fascinated by them. For her, everything exists only to be compared to its original, even with years of historical record and hindsight in her grasp. Because she compares, she feels less. Later, we also learn Tilda had a close relationship with Elizabeth Sobek. She loved her. Her central conflict with Aloy and Beta stems from her inability to see them as their own people, instead of as clones of Elizabeth.
I loved Elizabeth more than you could ever know. And I let her stay behind to die with the rest of humanity. A mistake I have regretted for 1,000 years. Now she stands before me again. Not some inferior copy, but her best possible self.
This is what her artworks allude to. The impossible love between Selene, goddess of the moon living up high, and the mortal Endymion. The little girl in the Night Watch, underestimated by all the powerful men around her, just as she and Liz were. The sculpture, The Frenzy, foreshadowing how madly her love and grief for Elizabeth burn. And, of course, the original Vermeer. Hazy, dreamlike, distant, where the contents of the woman's letter are unknowable, framed directly next to the Migeren, a copy in close, clear focus. Here. Now. She's reading music. It's a fascinating specimen for her to study, but one for which she feels less. Notably, this is not how the two pieces are displayed in the actual museum. It's Tilda's own take on their curation. There's another subtle detail here. The frame holding the Vermeer is in good condition. A bit worn, but well maintained, all things considered. By contrast, the Migeren's is splintered and in disrepair. It is like she cared for it less and thought of it as an accessory to the Vermeer, indistinguishable as its own thing. Her efforts reflect where she cared less. By extension, felt less. Hours later, in a fit of frenzy, she goes as far as to call Beta an inferior copy, as she ultimately becomes the final boss of the game. Tilda's importance to Horizon Forbidden West isn't just as a physical final test for you to fight, but also as a litmus test for how you think about the game's themes of imitation and of the future rhyming with the past. Personally, I don't feel less knowing Waterfall House was reborn as Tilda's mansion. I don't feel less for it compared to the real thing. I feel something different, something new, something poetic conveyed through mise-en-scène by architects constructing in an altogether different medium. Helen Brown's wishes in her exact words were, quote, "A museum for the custody and display of indigenous Indian relics, flora and fauna of the California coastal area, and historical objects pertaining to the Big Sur County," end quote. In that light, Tilda has brought Brown's dreams alive on a general level, but not in the specifics. In real life, there are trail markers around the area about the Esselen, the native people of Big Sur who are still very much around, and about the ecology of the area. That's as much museum as the place got to be. By contrast, Tilda's gallery is almost too clean, too curated with famous paintings, and completely divorced from the context of the landscape around her. There is nothing Big Sur about the place. As preservers of history, museums have a responsibility to engage with the land they're built on, and the people who live around that land, because they aren't neutral documents. They, as museums, have histories too. But this isn't a museum, is it? It's a vault. It is a hoard, curated primarily for Tilda's own eyes. In fact, the way she's curated her objects, which pieces are juxtaposed next to each other, which frames are pristine and which are allowed to fall into disrepair, tell us as much as her choices of objects themselves. The omissions tell us something too. Unlike Helen Brown, Tilda doesn't care about broader contexts, or provenances, or about indigeneity or the land she's bought out. She only cares how the art makes her feel. She cares about her interpretations and her way of seeing the world. about ownership of the art, and of any remaining ideas about it too. That is the beginning and end of the conversation. It is no accident, I think, that Tilda is an expert in forgeries. A forgery is a work of art that seeks to deceive, to imitate its original so closely as to pull the wool over your eyes. It is always inextricably linked to an original that came before. But as a series that is very much about machines and cloning and the cross between genetics and nurture, Horizon has never seen fit to end the conversation with easy labels about originals and copies. Tilda was close to Beta for a time. She tried to teach her about all this art of hers.
And you wanted Beta to see them?
Yes. Her upbringing was so cold and technical. I thought if she could experience Vermeer and Rembrandt, it would bring something else into her life. A heritage every bit as valuable as the scientific and technical data being drummed into her. I'm sorry I had to cut off contact, but I'll never regret sharing this house with her. She needed its shelter even more than I did.
Yet, her inability to nurture Beta into a second copy of Elizabeth Sobek through exposure to art, through her specific brand of intellectualism, is what drives so much of her disappointment in her. When she sees Aloy, though, she sees a second coming. A second chance. Of course, that's not how Aloy sees herself. See, in Horizon, imitation is not an act of forgery, but of progeny. Semantically, Aloy and Beta might be Sobek's clones, but for all intents and purposes, they are emotionally her daughters. Side by side and shoulder to shoulder, they are sisters. Aloy has always carried the weight of the world on those shoulders, but throughout the games, she repeatedly reckons with the fact that she's not Elizabeth Sobek. In fact, Forbidden West challenges her to embrace trusting and working with others in the way her mom never liked to. Likewise, Beta suffers great turmoil over the fact that she is nothing like Aloy. But as their relationship develops over the course of the game, that turns out to be a good thing. She has her own strengths. These parallels paint Tilda as a somewhat hypocritical person, someone who covets the past even though she is, herself, a product and producer of an apocalyptic future. This is what fascinates me about her mansion. It's neither original nor imitative, but a rebirth forged of new context, paying homage to the old. Regardless of how Guerrilla intends for us to read Tilda's mansion, I can't help but see it as a beautiful, but flawed and hopelessly decontextualized echo of Waterfall House. And I find myself thinking back to how my time in it helped me to pause and engage with art, in between all the action and grandeur of its larger game. The Horizon games are visually breathtaking, but their most interesting moments aren't in the fidelity or in how closely they recreate landmarks from our old world. They're in how they retell them. When I woke up here in Tilda's mansion, those machines my focus picked up ended up just being a machine nest by the waterfall. So, false alarm there. I was reading the signals wrong, I guess. Those machines technically make it a bigger safety concern now than it is in real life. Once the action did resume, of course I went down there for some obligatory scuffling and scrapping. And what a scuffle and scrap that was. I pushed through. I touched the waterfall. But once all that was done, of course, I looked back up.